okay, I just finished looking over the rules and setting up the board, looking at things a little bit, thinking a little more about the game, looking up stuff in the rules which I had questions about, and ended up answering a few of them, but not all of them. Figured I would share with you what I've figured out about the game so far and how it's going to play, and mainly how it's different from original Pandemic. And I can only assume from Pandemic Legacy. Yes, I know a little bit. So, in the first versions of the game, you're trying to stop outbreaks from spreading across the globe. And you're trying to stop several different ones. Here, you're basically trying to keep the world going and keep a single plague from breaking out across the world. And you do that, you accomplish that by having the cities supplied. So start of the game, this is the board setup that you would have for the Prologue. There's like an introductory game that you can play that does not impact the rest of the game. You don't do any of the legacy elements that change what's happening after that. But there's a prologue that you can play through as many times as you need to get a feel for how the game is different. It starts out with supplies in the 9 different cities that are here, and the havens are the 3 locations that your characters start in, which can have supplies at the start of the game. You can distribute them as you want for the beginning of this first prologue game and for January. There are 36 cubes of supplies altogether, and you get to decide where you want them to start out. So as the months progress, you're going to have far less of those to put where you want them. And I can only make a guess on this, because it seems like when you get to December, you have no cubes to decide where they go. The problem being, if there are none on the board, then each time the infection deck goes, which for each person's turn, you're going to have the infection deck, and much like the original game, you're going to draw your cards up. You're going to take 4 actions, which involves, moving and supplying and handing supplies back and forth and trying to establish supply stations and trying to recon new areas to open up these the packages you have in the bottom, which I only assume will have stickers that will open up more locations and stuff like that. But at the end of that, then you're going to draw the number of cards from the infection deck depending on what the infection level is, which means you're guaranteed going to draw 2 cards. So if there are no supplies on the board, when you draw a location, if that location doesn't have any supplies, then a plague cube gets added to that location. Oh, they've been plagued. New York has been plagued. And each time a plague cube comes onto the board, you increase this incident track. It only goes up to 8. There are only 8 plague cubes. So as soon as all 8 are on the board, that's it. You've lost. So the plague looks incredibly nasty, and you never want it to get out there. There is not, however, an outbreak when just 1 plague cube comes on the board. That city's been plagued. New York might come up again later on. It's not shuffled right now. There are 3 of each location in the deck to begin with. I can only assume as you explore out, you're going to be getting the cards for those locations. They're going to be going in the decks as well. But I don't know if you're just going to be adding those and this deck is going to grow in size, or if you're going to be swapping those cards out with the ones that are already here. Because this infection deck is not the determining factor for the end of a particular month. That comes through the player deck, which is where, all your epidemic cards are, just like the original Pandemic game. If this deck runs out, you run through all those cards, that's it. Game ends. But you can add more cards to this, and it's not going to change the length of the game. So I don't know if they're going to be adding more cards in or swapping cards out. You're open to whatever guess you have. Your guess, I'm sure, is just as good as mine. You know as much as I do about this game almost. So when plague cubes come out, Yeah, they're really nasty. If you do manage to get 3 plague cubes on the same location, then you also draw the card again, because you've shuffled them back in through the epidemic cards. Then you do get an outbreak. And now that there's 3 there, you would, well, we already would be at 3. You would put a 4th one. You don't. Incident marker still goes up by 1. Then every place connected to that also gets hit with the same effect as if their card had been drawn. Washington is connected, so they would lose one of their supply cubes. Jacksonville is connected, they would lose one of theirs. But also this place that we talked about, not a hospice, hacienda, the Haven. There it is. So the Haven would also get hit, and since it has no supplies, it would also get plagued. Plagued Haven. And we would, again, increase our incident marker. So, yeah, even though outbreaks can occur, you're usually in bad shape before they occur, and they're just going to make things even worse. And, yeah, that I'm sure will happen at some point as I'm playing through this game, and it will probably be just as terrifying as I imagine it being right now. Epidemics that are in this deck. There are 5 of them, and they're distributed just like the regular game. You take all the rest of the cards that you have, which have some rationed cards in them. You have locations. 4 of each location that starts on the game are in there, and they have 3 different colors: black, yellow, and blue, which you need to collect a certain number so that you can recon off from there and do certain things. You're not trying to gather them to prevent a cure. You're trying to gather them to either have 5 of them to bring in a supply city, supply location, or do your recon locations. I'm sure they'll come in for more objectives later on, but the start of the game, the prologue that you can play, the only objective you have is to build 3 supply centers. And I'm guessing that since the number of supplies that you have goes down by 3, more than likely, I think the objective for the first month is probably going to look the same. Build 3 supply centers, and where those supply centers are will probably permanently have a supply cube attached to it at the start of each game from there on. So it looks like every month it's going to go down by 3 until we get to September. Then it's going to go down by 4 and 4 and 4. So that is, again, just a guess. It's your guess is as good as mine. We'll see if mine ends up being correct or not in a little bit, in a few weeks, once I start actually playing this game with some people. But the epidemic guards get shuffled in with all these guys at equal spacing. So you put the starting cards you have into 5 piles. You put 1 epidemic and shuffle it into each of those 5 stacks, and then put all of them together to form your actual player deck. So you can count on there being 1 epidemic for every 5th of the deck that you get through. So how things go. There are also rationed cards to begin with, which you start out with 4 rationed cards because there are 4 rationed cards to start out with. But as you play, depending on if you win or if you lose, that will either increase or decrease the number of rationed cards you're allowed to put in your deck. As you win and you're doing better, the number of rationed cards you have is actually limited, which I guess is a balancing nature of the game, because as you lose, you get to increase the number of rationed cards you put in the deck, and they are pretty helpful. They do some very, very good things. There are also these produce supply cards, which have a consistent use, and they also have a one-time use, which you can do and basically burn the card. It's a way of getting supplies on the board, which if you use the consistent one, it's only going to put supplies in the specific haven or city with a supply center on it, supply city. It will only produce the supplies in that city up to its population level. Or if you do the big one, which ends up sacrificing the card, you do that same thing in every haven and every supply city. So, yeah, very powerful, but at the same time, there are only 8 of these cards in the game altogether. Yes, 8 to last you through what I can only assume is all 12 months, even though in the later decks or later months as we go through the legacy deck, we might get more of them. Who knows? I strongly doubt it, though. So that's how that stuff goes. Yeah, that's the main difference is instead of fighting infection, you're trying to supply in the different cities and try to keep plague from breaking out. Because it looks like once plague actually breaks out in an area, I don't think there's anything you can do to stop it. At least as far as the rules are concerned, there's nothing in the rules right now that says you can stop it. Maybe as we play through the game, those rules might develop because there are a lot of places in the rules where you will be adding stuff later on, different full sections where you will gather stuff. But the way you go about doing that and using your characters, let's talk about characters real quick. That's even cooler. So you get 5 characters. They're not bound to the portraits. These are pretty much just flavor. Pick which one you feel like doing. These are the 5 starting jobs that you have. And here are the different scars that you might end up getting if your character gets wounded. This is like a sheet of all your different upgrades. You can upgrade your characters at the end of each game, depending on how many cities you have connected to the grid, gives you a number of production units, production points, plus an extra one if you actually win that game. So depending on how many production points you have, you will spend those production points to basically get upgrades for your game state. Either you're going to upgrade your characters by giving them more abilities. You can upgrade locations by letting them do things. Those are the locations in your character deck. These different cards have a space for them. So you can buff these things up so that when you try to build a supply center in an area, instead of being one of that card, it counts as 2 cards of that color or even 3 cards of that color. You can also increase the effectiveness, actually decrease the effectiveness of some of the cards that you have in the infection deck with the additional things that you have down here. These are improvements that make it so that these cards aren't quite as bad when they come up. So even though it's improvements of the infection deck, which makes the infection deck less effective, making your overall standing better. And you can also use your production units to increase the population in different cities. And starting out, all of the cities and all of the havens have a population of 3. But any city that at the end of a game has a plague cube on it, that population is going to go down by 1. But any city that has a supply center at it is going to have the population go up by 1. And of course, if they have both at the same time, their population stays the same. It goes up 1 and then down 1, so it just stays the same. But you can use your production units to increase the population of those cities. And when you do, you pull these stickers out and you stick them on there. So these cap out at 8, but it also says that you go above that, you can, and if you run out of stickers, just take out an ink pen or a pencil or whatever and start marking that stuff down. Your characters, however, as I was talking about, it looks like you only have 5 characters. So if a couple of them die off, you have to start using these little generic characters, which don't have any special abilities, and they're way limited. But you have 10 different passports to choose from. And the difference, I can only guess, is in how these little scratch-off marks are at the bottom. Each character has 7 of these marks, and whenever you start your turn in an area that has a plague marker, you've been exposed to the plague, and you have to scratch off the next one in the line here for your exposure. So this character would have to mark off the very first one. And when you scratch it off, it might just be empty and have no symbol on it. So, okay, your character kind of got wounded, but nothing else bad happened. Or it could have a scar symbol on it, which means now your character has to, you get to choose, but your character has to pick up a scar, something that's going to be with them permanently for the rest of the game. Or at some point, it's not necessarily the last one. It could come before that. It could come like on number 4 or maybe number 3. I don't know. But it's different on each of them when those scar symbols come up and when a skull and crossbones comes up. If you scratch off the one that has a skull and crossbone on it, well, actually I think it's just a skull, not a skull and crossbone, just a skull. But when you scratch it off, that was it. That was all that character could take. That character's dead. Tear their card up, they're out of the game. There are 5 characters total, so one of them can die, and you can still pick up another one of these sheets and start using another character, which can build up, benefits and stuff. But, you're using your production units to help a character and buff the character up and make it to where they can do things. And to lose that character means you're also losing that production you put into the character. So I'm sure characters will die, even though I don't want to see that happen to them. Each round, you'll have a different objective for the first, not for the first month, but for the prologue. Your objective is to build 3 supply centers. And that just means getting to a location and having 5 of those, 5 cards of that color in your hand. Ding, there's some Washingtons and a New York. You do have a hand limit size of 7, but once you've got 5 cards of the same color in your hand, you can build a supply station. Other things you can do on your turn are dictated through your little handy helpful sheets here and by bonus actions, which you might get through the course of the game. But basically this is your movement. You can move to any adjacent place following a ship line. At the start of the game, everything is ship lines. There are no actual road lines, but there's a space in the rule book for a new rule to be placed, which I assume is going to be once you start going inland where you can follow road lines. You can also sail and charter. This is where you use cards of a certain name, which if you're on a connected ferry route, boat route, you can play the card for that city from anywhere on that connected boat route and move to that city. Or if you're in the city, you can play the card to move anywhere else along that connected boat route. You can also share cards with each other. Unlike the first version of the game, you can share a card whether you have the card or whether the other person has the card. So if there's 2 of you over here in Sao Paulo and the purple person has the card, if it's white person's turn, the white person can take the card from the purple person, as long as the purple person gives their permission, or pink, whatever it is, lightish red. But that's the main difference there from the original game. It had to be on your turn, you gave the card. This version, you can give the card or you can take the card. Either way, it's up to you. Other actions you can do is, as we talked about before, building a supply center if you have 5 player cards of that color. You can recon an area if you have what you need in that location, at that location. You can also make supplies where you take 1 from the stockpile and put it in that city, but just 1. If you're using the special cards, then you'll actually produce all the way up to the population maximum. You can do a couple of free actions in the lighter blue at the bottom of this card. Basically, you can pick up any number of supply cubes at your location for free. It doesn't cost an action to pick them up. It also does not cost an action to trade them between 2 people. And that is back and forth. If it's white's turn, you could freely give them to pink, or you could freely take them from pink, as long as pink agrees, without the cost of an action. What costs an action is placing them at a location. So that is the last thing you can do, which is delivering supplies. To do that, you take an action. You can take any number that you have on your character sheet and put them in that location. So picking them up and trading them with a friend is free. Putting them down, that's what costs effort, which seems kind of reverse logic for me because it actually takes effort to pick something up off the ground and it takes a lot less effort just to drop it. But hey, we will forego a little bit of physics to make this game interesting. So that's it. That's all that I know about this game. At this point, I'm sure I will learn a lot more as I play through it, like what these little stars are above this. Starts out with 1 and 2, and then it goes to 3, and then back to 1. I don't even know what that does yet, but I'm sure I'll find out. What's this 10 and 11 for? I don't know. Feel free to leave comments about your own playthroughs and how they're going, what you think of the game. And yeah, I'll let you know how it turns out once we start going into this. Until next time, keep playing.